Hello and welcome to another episode of the Curious Mind podcast. My name is Gabriel Ellis, and in the last episodes, I dealt with the topic of Ayatana, or the home base of consciousness, or the home base of the ego, as we can translate it. And today, I would like to return to the Buddhist perspective on that. So, what I've described in the previous episode was to show that also other spiritual and mystical traditions have the experiential understanding that spiritual meditation practices or devotional practices can lead to a change of the home base of the self, the ego, the consciousness, meaning that consciousness makes a step up, so to speak, and goes to a more comfortable, more lofty, airy, luminous space where it is then seated and it is not attracted anymore to the sensual realm. So most other experiential, spiritual, mystical traditions have this understanding. And why do I go back to the Buddhist perspective today? Is because Buddhism has the most sober perspective on the ayatanas, on those home bases of the ego. And why do they have this sober perspective? Is because they're actually not very interested in them. For them, to switch ayatanas to elevate the home base of the ego is just an intermediary step on in the journey to awakening, salvation, nirvana. And so for them, it's just a technicality, so to speak. It is a very worthwhile one and a very attractive one and a necessary one. But nonetheless, because they don't perceive it as an end goal, they don't have this maybe poetic, maybe devotional attachment to these levels, the stages of the mind, as other religious and mystical traditions do. And so, in terms of explaining it, this is why it's better to go to the Buddhist perspective, because they have the most sober, the most, so to speak, uh, objective perspective on those stages of consciousness and are not too attached to them in any way. So before I come to describe those higher ayatanas, those higher stages of consciousness, mind, and spirit, I also want to mention that there are lower ones. So as I described in the first and the second episode on the ayatanas, the main goal is to lift oneself up far away from the attachment to the sensual realm. But a non-attachment to the sensual realm is also available to lower realms. What I mean with that is that there are people who experience lower realms of consciousness that are also not basically in the everyday exchange with the outside world, with circumstances, but they are stuck, they are trapped in uncomfortable ayatanas of grief and despair. So let's say a full-blown depression is a good example of that. Why? Because people who are in severe depression, they are not in the interaction with the sensual realm, actually. So they don't even experience that, uh, from which Buddhist sources and other spiritual traditions warn us, namely to be stuck in the greed and the difficulties of the sensual realm. Depressed people wake up, they are in a bad mood. I'm exaggerating, but no matter what happens during the day, they stay in a bad mood of desperation and hopelessness and so on, and they go to sleep with it. So they also have their home base not in the sensual realm, but in a realm that is independent from the sensual experiences, that is made up by convictions, that is made up by basically understandings that they have from of themselves, wrong understanding of themselves, of other people, of the world, that it's a bad place to live in, and so on. And so this is why their organisms, the unconscious, is not particularly interested in an exchange with the outside world, with the sensual realm, basically because they expect that nothing good will come from that. Okay, so having this out of the way, there are lower realms of desperation and grief and sadness. There's the central realm that most people are located in, and then there are the higher realms that spiritual or mystical traditions aspire to lead us to, so that we are free from the difficulties of those lower realms. And Buddhism specifically wants to completely transcend all kinds of stages of the mind, of the spirit, of consciousness, of the ego, and wants to lead the practitioners towards complete awakening or salvation from any kind of dependence of a stage of consciousness. Now, the basis for the Buddhist transcendence of the lower realms, the central realms, the higher realms, is not basically a technique. So the understanding that Buddhism starts off from a meditation technique, and then one just has to adhere to this meditation technique, and then one can reliably go to these higher realms, is a gross misunderstanding of what the Buddhist teaching is about. The Buddhist teaching is basically rooted, and all progress in Buddhism is rooted in the truth more precisely of the mind, the truth of the spirit, the truth of consciousness. This is the teaching that the Buddha has laid out, and this is what his followers, his particularly monastic, the monks and the nuns who have followed the Buddha, what they aspire to apply to their practice, the truth that the Buddha has laid out. There's a quote that sometimes appears in the oldest Buddhist texts, in the Pali texts, and the quote of those enlightened followers of the Buddha goes like this: I am a son of the Buddha, born from his breast, born from his mouth, born from the Dhamma, created by the Dhamma, an heir to the Dhamma. And what is the Dhamma? Dhamma, or Sanskrit dharma, is an expression of either truth, or an old meaning of dharma is also the law of the mind again. Dharma is a general term, but applied to Buddhism, applied to the Buddhist teaching, it means how the understanding of how the functioning of the mind is according to specific laws that rule the mind and also rule the ascent, the progress of the mind. So in that sense, Dhamma or Dharma is equivalent to the Greek term logos. Logos, which also means something like truth, but it represents the real reality, so to speak. Again, we have to keep in mind in contrast to the central realm. So in the central realm, we can infer laws, we can make hypotheses about those laws, but the truth of these laws, they're actually on a different realm. And in Plato's kind of two-world understanding, there's the true realm of where the logos, where the forms are, and then we have only reflections of those in our daily life, in our central realm. So the law as such is pure. What does it mean in practice? If someone is a Buddhist practitioner, and again, I won't focus on Buddhist practice, but you can take any other spiritual, mystical practice in that respect. If someone is a Buddhist practitioner, they hear the words of the Buddha. They believe that this is the truth. But to believe that something is the truth doesn't make it the truth. So what they need to do is, they're not reinventing the wheel. They're not setting aside everything that the Buddha taught and try to figure it out themselves. No, they start with the teachings of the Buddha, but then they work hard to see the actual reality of that in their own minds, in their own experiences. And this is what we can say meditation practice is. To give you a few examples of this, there is one concept. Old Buddhism, Pali Buddhism, has many, many concepts. And one of these concepts is the 7 links or the 7 limbs of awakening. In Pali, it's Bojjhanga. Anga is the limb. Bodhi is awakening. So these are the limbs, or the elements of awakening. What is the first of these elements? What is the first of those limbs? It's what we have learned to translate as mindfulness. The original word is sati, and it actually means memory, remembering. And what do we remember as a first step of the practice? We remember the words of the Buddha. So again, we don't start with a technique. We start with adhering to and I'm trying to understand the words, the truth of the Buddha. The second step, the second limb in those 7 limbs of awakening is the investigation of truth. Dhamma vichaya, the investigation of truth, the investigation of the teaching. So again, the first step is to remember what the Buddha taught. The second step is to investigate what it means. And I'm investigating this in my mind, which means that I'm trying to grasp, to get an insight into the truth, the real truth of that, the lived truth, the experiential truth, not the conceptual truth. And this is what I'm doing in the meditation. There's a third limb out of this investigation of the truth, starting to see that there is an actual truth to it, that it's not just a concept, that it's not just something that is made up, but that's something that is applying to my own life, to my own mind. The third limb is willpower or perseverance. Virya. It's a strength, it's a curiosity, it's energy that comes from that, the energy to continue on the path. So this is an example for how at the beginning of the Buddhist practice, we don't have techniques to focus on the breath, for example, or anything like that. We have the teaching of the Buddha as the beginning. To give you another example, when we reach meditation stages in Buddhism, it's called jhana. So jhanas are kind of the progressively higher stages of meditation if we are successful. Now, there's kind of a very stereotypical description of practitioners in the Buddhist texts who get into jhana, and it starts with them finding an isolated place, an isolated hut, or the root of a tree, and then with crossed legs, they sit down and they practice mindfulness or memories of remembering the teachings of the Buddha. And then the first 2 elements of the first jhana is vitaka and vichara. Vitaka, again, are words, the words of the Buddha, and vichara is pounding, is grinding, is repeating, hitting again and again the meaning of those teachings in my mind, realizing the truth of them in my mind. So again, the beginning of the meditative journey or the progress in the meditative journey is to grasp, to understand, to get insights into the truth of what the Buddha taught in my own reality, in my own mind. Further applications are in what is called Vipassana meditation. Vipassana meditation, now it goes a little bit more in the direction of techniques. You can go to Vipassana retreats and then you'll learn how to apply this. What are the major kind of hallmarks? What are the major constituents of Vipassana, the Vipassana practice? It's again 2 core principles that the Buddha laid out. One is anicca. This is what it's called in Pali. Anicca means that nothing stays the same, that things become other than what they are, or in other words, it's impermanence. So the principle of impermanence is fundamental for Vipassana. And impermanence is a core principle of what the Buddha taught. Things just don't stay the same, neither in matter, and most of all, not in our mind. Things constantly change in our mind. And so to observe that, to understand that, to get the deep insight into that is the goal of Vipassana meditation practice. So again, here it starts with a principle of truth. Investigating this truth, realizing this truth in my mind is what constitutes the progress in meditation. Second core principle that Vipassana is built on is called anatta, which means it's difficult to translate this term, but it basically means that there is no substance, that there is no core to things, that things are what they are, and what they are is constantly changing. But there is no substance, for example, in me, in myself, that would remain the same, and just the superficialities would change. No, everything is in a constant flux. And so to contemplate again my inner truth, to contemplate this principle of the lack of substance, of inherent substance, is a fundamental aspect of Vipassana practice. So actually, when you go to a Vipassana retreat, or when you do guided meditation and Vipassana, you're not following a technique. You are following techniques derived from the fundamental truths that the Buddha laid out. And so again, we start with the truth, and the truth is logos in Greek terms, meaning that from that perspective, meditation practice is applied philosophy. Philosophy as the set of constructs that try to describe the reality of the world. The specialty in meditation, though, is, or Buddhist meditation, is that it's about the truth of the mind. How does the mind work? How does suffering work? Unhappiness or happiness, attachment, and the lack of attachment. How does that work? The inner workings of that is the Dharma, is what the Buddha laid out. And to understand this for myself, to make it a lived reality, this is what meditation practice is. And this is what elevates the states of the mind to higher levels, because elevating the mind is the result of applied truth to my own mind. Now, I described that the term Ayatana is the term for the levels of the mind, for where the ego, the consciousness, the mind, the spirit is having its home base. And so there are different ayatanas mentioned in the Buddhist texts, not just like in other traditions, kind of the divine realm or the realm of light. No, there are different ayatanas mentioned in the texts. There is a rare mention of what I said before, the jhanas, the meditation stages, as ayatana. So when I do practice, and for a short while I get what is characteristic for those lower jhanas, ecstatic feelings, feelings of firework, light, euphoria. So these are characteristics of lower stages of jhana. Usually when we achieve those stages, it's basically a vacation. We find them fascinating, but we don't build our home yet in them. It's only when we really apply the teachings to see the sensual realms, to see them for what they are, which is that they are dangerous, that they are lowering us, that they are inviting us to stay in places of suffering. And when we learn what the escape from these realms, from the sensual realms is, only then those short vacations in jhana become more actually retreats, home stages, home places, home bases of the mind, because then we understand that we have nothing significant to get from the sensual realm. We're not interested in the sensual realm anymore. We're interested with something that is according to higher truths. And so we let go from the attachment of, not of sensual objects, but of the sensual realm in general. And so the spirit, the mind, the consciousness is orienting itself automatically to something else, to something that is more elevated. And so it turns its back away from the sensual realm and turns towards the higher realm. And those higher realms can be jhanas. More frequently mentioned is the ayatana of infinite space. This is when kind of the individual objects become uninteresting, and the vessel in which those individual objects are embedded, which is space as such, becomes the more interesting realm to orient myself towards. So infinite space Where is infinite space embedded? If I transcend that, it's embedded in consciousness. So infinite consciousness is the next higher ayatana that people can get accustomed to, that build that base on, depending on the practice. Beyond even that, as the teachings tell us, is the realm, the ayatana of infinite nothingness. And beyond that, there is even a more lofty ayatana of neither perception nor non-perception, or neither consciousness nor non-consciousness. Okay, so that, of course, is very abstract. I doubt that many practitioners have the privilege to achieve those stages, either in vacation style or to actually build their home base in those stages. But nonetheless, we see a layout, a very logical progression in the Buddhist texts of ayatanas as a result of insight into the truth of the mind, or the deficiencies of the mind. Now, what I try to do in my channel is to combine different perspectives and to bring them together under a psychological umbrella. And this is what I want to do now as well. It is fine and nice to be fascinated by those different realms of consciousness. And I can imagine that they're so fantastical. You either are completely fascinated by this and think that I want to experience that too, or you think it's so fantastical that it's completely unrealistic. Nonetheless, because it's not a reality yet when we hear it, let's take someone who is fascinated by that. They read books, they see YouTube videos, they hear maybe monastics to talk about those realms, and it's like science fiction, it's like fantasy. They want that. They want to get there. And so what they do in their mind is to form an image, an ideal. And as I've described in many episodes before, when we set up ideals for ourselves, it is good. It can bring us forward. It can make us work, practice, listen, communicate, and so on. But the disadvantage, the possible problem when we set ourselves ideals is that we create a conflict with the unconscious. Because on the one hand, we want to go somewhere. On the other hand, this place that we want to go to is not a reality yet. And so I'm in love, I'm infatuated with a fantasy because I don't know what the reality of those fancy realms are. I'm just in love with how it sounds and what I imagine how it could be to get there. And so I'm pushing myself towards this practice. I'm pushing myself to get there. Sometimes I imagine that I'm just very close, or in my last meditation session, I think I got a glimpse of that. So these are all aspects of infatuations, of ideals. Now, how does it work? Because usually when we set ourselves ideals to become rich, to be good looking, to make good presentations, to be successful, efficient, and so on, it leads, like I said, to the conflict with the unconscious. And the unconscious is not convinced by what we want to achieve, and it brings us back to our normal needs. And so we are conflicted. On the one hand, we want to exercise and we want to practice, we want to learn. On the other hand, we are tired, we are exhausted, we are pessimistic, and these are the impulses from the unconscious. So how is it supposed to work when we aspire those, when we develop in those Buddhist teachings? Doesn't it create these problems that we fall in love with ideals and that we lie to ourselves, that we suppress normal reality, and we do basically what the term is spiritual bypassing? We have real life issues with ourselves, with self-esteem, with other people, with our family, with work, and so on. And then what we try to do out of anxiety, out of the lack of responsibility for our lives, we try to find an easy way out to the heavens, to those divine realms. Actually, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to argue with anyone. I don't have to struggle with work. I don't have to challenge authorities. I just have to go to the forest and sit somewhere in a cave, in a monastery. Escapism. This is what the danger is. Spiritual bypassing. I try to forget about my relationship issues by going to some monastery, sitting cross-legged and meditate all the time. This is the danger, and this is indeed what happens to many people. But how is it supposed to work? What is supposed to happen successfully when we meditate is that through the investigation of the Dharma, through investigation of the truth of the mind, first of all, I get insight into the problems that I have. Maybe not necessarily in a kind of a therapeutic way, but I understand what attracts me. I understand why I have issues with people because I'm interested in truth. Secondly, the whole idea of the Buddhist Dharma, of the Buddha describing what the truth of the matter is, that at the end, the promise is to find full satisfaction, not in a hedonistic way, but the full satisfaction of escaping from suffering, or to put it in more psychological terms, the satisfaction of the actual needs that I have, not the apparent ones. The apparent one can be I want power, I want this car, I want the satisfaction of a great conversation. This is how it appears to us. But when we look deeper, these are all representatives of more fundamental needs. The fundamental need of peace, of truth, satisfaction, of real love, real openness. These are very fundamental and abstract needs behind the everyday needs that we actually experience. So the whole idea of the Buddhist progress and what allows us to build our home in another realm, on a higher realm, is not that we forget our daily needs and bypass them, but that we actually satisfy them. We ingest, we develop, we get insight into what we actually want, not what society told us or we thought what we wanted, but we investigate reality, the reality that was laid out by the Buddha. This is for the Buddhists. And then we get insight in those, and then there comes the deep satisfaction of, oh, this is what it is. This is what I truly wanted. I wanted to be satisfied with myself, within myself, not to struggle. The lightness of the mind. These are experiences of the first developments of the meditation practice. This is what we actually experience when the mind elevates, and then we understand, oh, this is what it's about. And then the teaching tells us, the Buddhist masters tell us, this is just the beginning. And so we are interested, we are hooked. And psychologically, the unconscious that usually rebels when we set ourselves unrealistic or high ideals because it understands that it's not there, and it protests because it wants us to keep in mind the actual needs that we have. This unconscious, ideally on a Buddhist progress of the mind, it gets what it wants. It even gets what it wants in a much better way than I thought I could do through daily means. And so this is why it subjects itself and submits itself to the process of meditation, not because it is pushed down and suppressed forcefully, aggressively by willpower. Maybe this is necessary in the beginning. No, because it truly understands he wants the right thing. She wants the right thing, which means the manager in us, the ones that guide our meditation, the ones that investigate truth. I, unconscious, am in good hands. Let them do their thing, because so far I got what I wanted, true satisfaction. And so the unconscious stays relatively quiet or is on board and supports us with the necessary energy to go through the practice. Now, this is ideal. How is it in reality? There are ups and downs in the process of meditation. Even when we achieve higher stages, we lose it sometimes. We get complacent. We tell ourselves that we achieved something, but actually it's not real. So sometimes we fall back in the practice. And then, yes, of course, the unconscious comes back and complains and wants us to do something and puts us in conflict. But again, ideally, when we practice correctly, the unconscious is appeased. And this is a confirmation for the practitioner that they're not doing spiritual bypassing, but they're actually progressing towards the truth that, a little bit in Christian terms, not only sets us free, but also our unconscious. Okay, to give you just two more clues, a little bit more in the direction of practice and technique. As I repeated again and again, it starts with the truth. Vipassana meditation is such an application of the Buddhist truth in practice. There are two more principles that I want to mention for practice. One is the imperturbable, to not react. The principle of non-reaction in meditation is quite an important one. It means that whatever pops up in the mind, you don't react to it, because we don't want to fall into the traps of old habits of reaction. And by practicing non-reaction, the imperturbable, the unshakable, the unmovable, by practicing that, we get detached from the more sensually oriented happenings in our mind, from the thoughts that get triggered by that, the emotions that get triggered by that. And so it can lead to a very peaceful state of mind when we practice non-reaction, non-attachment, and all those principles that go in this direction. The other principle is kindness, goodness. We need that for practical reasons. We need that also if we want to develop certain qualities of the mind that allow us to go further in our practice. In practical terms, we need that because when we practice meditation, especially in the beginning, meditation becomes an exercise in failure, an exercise in frustration, because we want to focus, let's say, on the breath. We want to focus in a vipassana manner on the coming and going of experiences in the mind. But no matter what I want to focus on, my experience is that the mind takes me on a journey, daydreaming, to-do lists, difficulties, frustration, again. So this is the normal experience of the beginner in meditation. And what do we do when we get frustrated, when we don't achieve our goals of wanting so nicely to concentrate on an object, to concentrate on the breath, for example? We get frustrated. And when we get frustrated, we get angry. So what is quite normal for practitioners when they start out is that in the reaction to the failure to concentrate, they become autoaggressive. They judge themselves, they become harsh in the language and the attitude towards themselves. Emotions of frustration and self-depreciation might come up. And all of these, of course, are strong disturbances. When I get angry about myself that I failed to concentrate, it will not make my next minutes better in concentration. The aggression in that is what hinders it. And so what I need to develop quite in the beginning already is that when I catch myself having drifted away in my meditation, to bring myself back with kindness. That when I think of other people and how they wronged me and so on, to apply in the meditation, but also in daily life, of course, kindness, forgiveness, understanding, empathy, compassion, all of those qualities towards myself, towards other people. So this is, in a sense, functional. It's necessary as a technical skill in order to progress in meditation. But in Buddhism, it's even more than that. Later traditions, by the way, historically, Mahayana, Zen, and so on, they put much more emphasis on kindness, on loving kindness of the heart as a quality, as a salvatory quality, one that liberates us. But even in old Buddhism, the qualities of loving kindness is a goal in itself and can be a stepping stone on salvation when I make love, basically, kindness, the center, the home base of my mind, and I develop further and further by making this more subtle, more boundless, more endless, more limitless in my mind. These are legitimate ways to liberate the mind. And if you want the Pali term for us, it's Chitta Vimutti. Vimutti is the liberation, Chitta is the mind. So this, according to the old sources, can liberate the mind in itself as well. Kindness, loving kindness. And so additionally to all those principles of truth, I just wanted to point out two more technique and technically oriented principles of practice. One is to not react, and one is loving kindness towards myself, other people, and towards my mind. So this concludes my short series on Ayatana. I hope you got some more understanding in how the mind is built, that the mind is built not just around the normal experiences that we have in daily life and the short excursions of happiness or devastation, but that there are legitimately other stages, other levels of consciousness that, if we practice accordingly, we can make them our home. And having made them our home, they living in this place, residing in this place mentally, makes our life so much more easy, light, convenient, loving, and so on. And this is for the people who don't aspire to transcend them completely, like Buddhism suggests we should do as a goal. But of course, that there are the few Buddhist practitioners who are not satisfied with having elevated states of mind or home bases of the mind. They want to go all the way. But this is something that exceeds my understanding and my ability to describe. So I hope you enjoy it. Let me know if you have any question or comments, and I hope to see you next time.